Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back to the show. We are honored to have Grant Venerable joining us, our, of course, professional of the year, our doctor, our chemist, our author, our professor, our friend, and man who's lived an amazing life. He continues to inspire people. We're grateful he's here today. And we're opening up the phone lines right away, 631-307-4010. If you have any questions as we continue, please feel free to call. Grant, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I had an exciting event over the weekend. Friday, I drove down to Pasadena, which is about 140 miles from where I live in 29 Palms. I was invited, as I had been before with my brother and sister, to have dinner at Caltech at the Grant D. Venerable House, which has about 125 student residents who live there. Just brilliant young minds who are searching for their place in the world. And I'm honored to be able to speak to them. My sister and brother couldn't go Friday, but I went. I drove down. It was an especially beautiful drive, and I need to tap into what that's about. And that Southern California, a vast habitat for humanity. There must be 18 million people who live in that general vicinity. It's more than a lot of nations in the world. And it lives in a bowl. And the bowl is framed on the west, by the ocean, the beaches. So that's constantly bringing in winds, breezes off the ocean that help to hold the atmosphere in the Los Angeles basin, which goes really from Santa Barbara all the way down to San Diego. And it's some of the most beautiful country in the world. It's not as well known like the Colorado Rockies or the Sierra Nevada north of the Los Angeles basin, but the mountains around Los Angeles are incredibly beautiful and noteworthy, and they go all the way from the ocean at Malibu, where the Santa Monica Mountains crop up, and they wrap around that basin. They head east, and then they cross the San Diego Freeway, which is I-405, and then it goes into the San Fernando Valley is to the north of that, and it is in a bowl. Mm-hmm. And the southern part of the bowl are these Santa Monica Mountains, and then you go further east, you hit the Hollywood Hills. They're not as tall as the Santa Monica Mountains, and you get to Griffith Park, where the big planetarium is, and then it goes up in elevation as you go east into Pasadena and the San Gabriel Valley. Well, the San Gabriel Valley is framed on the north by the San Gabriel Mountains, which are incredibly beautiful. I grew up being inspired by those mountains because they get up to 5,000 to 7,000 or 8,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And when they were filled with snow, I always enjoyed looking at them from my schoolyard at Vermont Avenue School. Mm-hmm. And it was just an enchanting thing for me. But life really has been for me a series of enchanting moments. That's why I mention that, because I finally got the layout of the particular mountains as I left Pasadena Saturday morning to come back home. And I'd been trying to place the biggest mountain in Southern California, Mount San Gorgonio, named after Saint Gorgonio. It rises to an altitude of, I think, something like 12,500 feet. Well, that's as tall as a lot of the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada Mountains. Yeah. And in the winter, it accumulates great snow. And there was snow on it as I passed by it. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm mentioning all that to say it's part of space and time that human beings live in. And these mountains framed my childhood, and I imprinted them. I imprinted the the inspiration of them, and so it made me interested in geography. Then it wraps around toward the south, toward Palm Springs,
Yeah.
which is bordered by other tall mountains that look like alpine peaks.
Mm-hmm.
Mount San Jacinto, which is about maybe up to 10,000 feet, but it's across the freeway from Gorgonio. They're only about 20 miles or less apart. And I got to see that coming back from Pasadena Saturday because the air was so clear and I could see the mountains on the left of me as I was driving the car and then going through the little gap as I-10 passes through Palm Springs. But before Palm Springs, I go up
Yeah.
into the Joshua Tree Mountains, into the Yucca Valley. So having said that, I want to read a part of my memoir.
Sure.
The memoir is called Footprints in the Chaotic Unknown. Art, Science, Oracles, and Kinfolk. So that's really the sum total of my life is
Oh,
about
wow.
art, science, my kinfolk, my ancestors, and the oracles are the wise people, the elder wise people who have mentored me over my lifetime. Um, the I want to take on the prologue. We got into it a little bit the last time that we spoke, and I want to get more deeply into the memoir. And I realized I was leaving out some keywords I needed to talk about it more comfortably and to bring listeners into what I had to say about it. So, prologue is in volume 1. It can, there's 4 ebook volumes of this memoir. I mean,
Okay.
it's a lot of words. It has 32 chapters spread over about 4 volumes. The prologue uh, are reflections on my origin, my reflection on my ancestors, reflection on the family development. And there's this interesting section that you don't hear much about on the evening news or any
Yeah.
social media. And that starts on page 26 of
Okay.
volume 1. And this is what the hardcover looks like. I've only done one paper or hardcover volume, but that's coming up next. So right now it's online at Amazon, at Apple, at
Okay.
Barnes and Noble, and look for it under footprints on footprints in the chaotic unknown. Well,
Wow.
it was in the last week that phrase ran through my mind, and I think I was having a religious discussion. And I told the friends I was talking to, well, that's what God is. God is the chaotic unknown.
Yeah.
Now, people dress that up with different stories and mythologies, depending on where they existed in the world. So that prompted me to come back to that because it's that part of human
Mm-hmm.
history that gets us to where we are today. And it all started really in the vicinity of 10,000 years ago.
Wow.
That was the time of the last big glaciation that occurred in the northern hemisphere. There was the big glacier that covered North America, the Wisconsin, I think it was the Wisconsin glacier. And then you got the same thing in Europe. But you see, the continents were still forming. And that glaciation did the last big formation as it melted and caused a lot of flooding, a lot of rainstorms, a lot of snowstorms. But uh, what happened after that was it put a kind of a semicolon in human
Yeah.
history. How did people gather and eat food? That's what
Mm-hmm.
the end of the glaciation demarcated. And so people were mainly hunters and gatherers uh, before that glaciation ended.
Yeah.
And when you had all this ice and snow and cold, uh, people learned how to hunt even in the cold, but they would have uh, kill animals that they could eat as well as get their fur coats from.
Mm-hmm.
But it was after the glaciation that people became more settled in certain places of the world. They had been more wanderers
Yeah.
before that. Our history goes back to the Middle
Mm-hmm.
East, the Levant, North Africa, Egypt, the Afro-Asiatic region is called, and that goes as far as India and China and Southeast Asia, Australia. What happened as people got settled and they had little plots where they could grow? They could gather
Yeah.
seeds, plant these seeds, and grow
Mm-hmm.
crops, nuts, fruits,
Oh, wow.
and there was a period of several hundred years where that's the only way that they cultivated uh, food that we could take out of the ground. And then
Mm-hmm.
something remarkable happened called hoe agriculture,
Okay.
where you could use a hoe instrument to begin to
Oh,
dig
wow.
furrows in the earth and in
Oh,
crops. So that's when crop agriculture started, and that started everything else. And I wonder every time I talk about that, it's a remarkable feeling that I get, namely that uh, economics came about, crude economics, but nonetheless, that had to do with how they gathered food and they learned to trade food for other things, uh, ornaments, instruments with people from surrounding regions. So that established a primary kind of a elementary trading system. Well, the agriculture got more sophisticated until they had animals that could pull a plow and have a more sophisticated crop type agriculture. Well, religion developed in parallel to how we got food and how we survived. But religion probably not in any organized philosophical way. It didn't come about until after the glaciation. But before that, there was like 100,000, 200,000 years. People in groups were began to marvel at a phenomenon called death, where a person in the group, the gathering, would no longer breathe. They were no longer apparently in their bodies. And so people felt they were called to honor something beyond life, beyond their individual beings. And that led to religion. It led to the most elementary ideas about deities, whatever they thought that was, a deity. It's really funny today. I'm going to segue real quick to the latest political battles around something called DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which evolved in education as a way of leveling the playing field between the haves and the have-nots. Well, I've always been amused that in some people's fervor in wanting to get rid of DEI because they thought it was a bad thing.
Oh,
And
here we go. I hear someone. Hi, welcome to the show. You were live on
let's
the line.
let's talk.
Hi, hi.
Hey, what do you think was the one thing that helped you with your success? I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
I didn't quite hear that.
He asked about one thing that you think helped contribute with your success.
For success,
Yes.
number one, to understand history and how we as a people, a human people, came from where we were. And that's what I'm doing right now, to get to where we are now. Because that, not knowing that as an individual about our own individual lives, but our group lives, it impedes our getting forward. So I'm going to talk more about something that became more a reminder to me just in the last 2 weeks when I realized the future that everyone wants. And the gentleman just said success. I think living a successful life. How do you do that? You have to claim the future now. That's how to do it. That's the key to it all. And all those terms came to me or recame to me. I was reminded that you have to claim what you do not have, but want and desire to have to survive. And failing to do that prevents that future from manifesting. And I say manifesting because it already exists. And I had to remind myself of that, having moved from Georgia to the desert, the high desert here, beside Joshua Tree National Monument. I had to let go of my immediate past in order to get to my present future. It was a future before I got here, but now that it's here, it's manifesting. It's not complete, but it's manifesting. Part of my purpose is to relate more frequently and deeply with young people in college. And we're starting with our father's alma mater at Caltech, where we've been several times in the last 3 years. And that has been so enriching to me. I'm realizing in a way it has put our aging processes on pause, and even maybe done better than that. It's in a way reversed our aging processes as we beckon, we call forth the future to be in our present. Now, that's pretty abstract, I realize, but as you think about it, about that the future is something you have to claim in your imagination, which is the most powerful tool that a human being has and distinguishes us from our animal comrades, our plant comrades, our microbial comrades. And I use that word in consciously. Comrades, there are fellow living organisms. And as we take care of them on this planet, as well as ourselves, we achieve this harmonious equilibrium and balance, which without diversity, we can never achieve. Diversity can be very clever. It can be almost insidious, the way it occurs, to save us from ourselves when we get too entrenched in one way of being. Sometimes it can be very, very frustrating. And philosophers have written about that. Example, Howard Thurman, one of the great theologians of the 20th century, who was born in Daytona Beach, Florida, in the 1890s, late 1890s. Thurman was a teacher. He was the first spiritual teacher of young Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta. But Thurman moved up from Daytona as a young college boy to attend Colgate Seminary. He became a Baptist preacher, but later on he expanded his vistas into many religious expressions, including the Quakers, mysticism, the Unitarians, the Episcopalians, all of it, and Judaism. So Thurman became the go-to guy for rabbis who wanted to understand their Judaism in greater depth than they had been. There has to be a man or a woman who does that in human history. You can't just go to the seminaries and the schools and expect to get everything, but you get primary tools from the schools. So Thurman wrote an amazing poem that gave me a basis for grappling with something that was such a sinister thing as slavery in America, which I'll say half of my ancestors had been part of, and the other half had been part of it in another way. So there's the half that were owned by people, and so I was descendant also from the half that owned people. Now, that's where people can get pretty kind of excited and frustrated because they don't have a way to talk about it with much ease or philosophical depth. But Thurman got that ball rolling when he and his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, were on a cruise off the coast of West Africa in the 1940s. It was off Senegal, across an island called the Ile de Gorée.
Yeah.
In which Thurman theorized, he meditated on, well, he meditated there because this castle at the Ile de Gorée is where captured people were put until they were put on ships and they were sent to the Western Hemisphere. They were sent to South America, the Caribbean, North America, Canada. Thurman wrote a poem that actually expressed what the captives must have been thinking on those ships. They weren't able, like on an ocean liner, to walk around the decks
I know,
go
right?
to dinner in the dining hall. No, these were sailing ships propelled with the wind, and people were chained up on different levels coming up to the upper decks. So you could get plenty of people on those ships. The miracle is that, well, first of all, half of the people that got on the ships never got to the other side.
Wow.
They got ill.
Yeah.
Or they got ill. They died on board. And the ones that died were just simply thrown overboard. But the rest of them, the rest of the people actually survived the voyage.
Yeah.
And they began to live their lives in South America, in the Caribbean, in North America, in the United States. Thurman was using his mystical impulses to consider what were they thinking about. And so those are the words of the poem. People chained up together right next to each other. They couldn't do anything. They things we normally do. And these voyages would take 1 or 2 months to get over there. So he was thinking, did they see a day in the future again? Did they see a day when their descendants would be living in the bright sunlight of freedom in another place.
Yeah.
And they would be living their lives there and creating a new culture. That is indeed what has happened and is taking place today.
Ah,
It's hard to see that when you're fixated into one fixed, narrow moment of society.
sure
And
is.
things that are miserable, you wonder if they're ever going to change. Or
Yeah.
things that are happy, you'd like to have more happiness, joy.
Yeah. Ah.
So that's what, when I read that, I said, wow, I see what he means.
Mm-hmm.
So he's looking and not sitting there moaning and saying, oh, woe is us. He's saying we can use our imaginations to conjure up how we want our lives to be in freedom. And if it takes this, that's in the hands of the Creator.
Yeah.
Seems hard to take at times when you're living in
Mm-hmm.
a present that you may not survive, or you may survive it. But as I began to study with wise mentors who had a long range view of history, and that was one of my colleagues at San Francisco
Yeah.
State University, Wade Nobles, who had a timeline of history that took us from 15,000 years before the present, called BCE, before the Common Era, also called BC, before Christ, years before Christ. But Nobles painted this picture that made me realize if we can describe in
Yeah.
words, in art, in songs, in painting, poetry, what it is we want our future to be like, and develop ritual practices that imprint that future in our present day brains. We hasten that future. We know not when it may come, but that's what I'm doing right now with my siblings, is we're manifesting a future that we have been entertaining now for some years. And we were in a life of being, I won't say stuck, but we were in our separate pathways, our careers, and realized
Mm-hmm.
we could have a unified family existence once
Yeah.
again, as our grandparents did. They were the whole reason for being of the big extended family
Yeah.
of their adult children, their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, and what we did was that let's bring that back. We need more of that. Society needs that. And I once said on one of these podcasts that I'll say reason, or at least the causality of our not being able to have the balanced technologies we need. And that goes the gamut from food technology,
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical
Oh,
technology,
yeah.
medical technology, to transportation
Yeah.
technology, financial technology, all of the technologies we need to live successfully. But
Wow.
if we don't have the family as we knew it
Mm-hmm.
back as recent as 1970, I'll put it like that, we cannot produce children
No,
who think holistically, which is the way you have to
I
think
I
to
know.
feed yourselves, because we came
Yeah.
off the farm. My mother was born on the farm in Topeka, Kansas in the 1910s. My father was born on his elders' farming properties in
Yeah.
Odessa, Missouri, other places around Missouri. And my father and his sister were these great holistic thinkers. They knew what affected what, in what order you had to do it. And we're in danger of losing that with more complicated technologies. And I already mentioned about the tragedy of the disaster in India, of our most advanced airplane.
Oh,
And it thought, after it took off,
yeah.
the control systems thought that it was still on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so it had to bring the plane back to the ground. So it cut off the engines. It cut the fuel off from the engines, and the plane just went right to the ground. That's the logic of it. That's the logic of where we are. It's called metaphysics, the in-between science and mathematics, between, I'll call the heavenly realm, the realm of the imagination, the realm of the great mysteries, and our everyday physical existence. So I decided, I think, as a very young boy, that my calling had something to do with what is it that I love about my family that gives me such a sense of confidence in being able to ask the question, do I trust life?
God bless.
Not only just life, but do I trust my life that I'm leading? Does everyone else trust their lives? I can't know. I can't be responsible for the lives of others. But I can be a teacher and help the young to ponder that question with some effectiveness and meaningfulness.
Yeah.
So we could pause for pause for the cause. And by that, I mean getting more into the nub of causality.
And the number
And
again,
that
if you
takes
want to
us-
call, 631-307-4010. Anyone else, please feel free to ask anything. 631-307-4010. Go ahead. I figured perfect time for me to chime in.
The nub of causality is what causes what, how, and why. So I was reading this section in the prologue about my great-great-grandmother, Ari Scott White. And I talk about Ari in terms of the letters written to her by her mother, who was Lucy Scott, born in 1785 in Virginia. Now that's getting pretty far back, but Lucy, she wanted to live in upright honesty. She wants them to live in accord with how the Bible wants them to live, or how their preachers want them to live. So I talk here about free will. Now, there's a philosopher named Viktor Frankl who talks about free will. What is that? Ari's comparative freedoms. If you heard what I said, this woman is living in servitude in 1850s, Southern Kentucky, south of Louisville. And yet the author, which is me, talks about her comparative freedoms that allowed her a limited exercise of free will to come and go as she pleased within shrewd discretion. And one, wonders, well, there's horrible accounts of how they were forced to live. And there's other accounts, such as what I know to be true from the oral tradition, from elders I knew who knew their elders who had been slaves. So it ain't also what we hear on the news or in politics, or people trying to persuade us to shed light on Aries' mother's religious concerns for her living in sin. That's what she might this be. Perhaps it was the fact that Aries lived in proximity to her owners and their normative sin, that is, the owner's normative sin of ownership of human beings in that day. I say normative in the deep South and the border states and in New England. Perhaps it was the fact that to her owner, so it was not entirely a sin, now often associated with such Victorian era offenses as masturbation, fornication, and pornography, or modern hardcore sins like adultery, drug trafficking, theft, rape, murder, and arson. So that sets the record straight on what we're going to talk about. But we consider the times. It has been uncritically blanket asserted as gospel truth by many scholars as well as casual commentators on slavery that all Black slave women who bore children by white male owners were violently or otherwise forcibly raped. While this was probably the case in most instances, for Aries Scott, the amount of force was unknown in her bearing of biracial offspring of men in the plantation family contact. Perhaps this was only a minor part of the sin Lucy was referencing in her letter. Aries' sexual liaisons, along with her other life intentions, would seem to have been as much a function of Aries' self-actualizing free spirit as it was of the reduced degree of oppressiveness of her particular environment. That's very important when you study science, when you study medicine, when you study astronomy. It's small little differences that can make the big difference in the success or the failure of something. However, her sexual liaisons had to be as much a function of the personal motives of the fathers of her offspring. We shall never know in our post-20th century ways of establishing certitude, although we may infer much. Lucy's letters to her beloved daughter give hint of a mother's awareness of the unvarnished racial dynamics of plantation life, no matter the reduced degree of oppressiveness, and her daughter's unvarnished, beyond pretense, human character. In other words, girls, wherever they were on planet Earth, there were those girls they took more freedom than other girls did, called free will. And this refers not only to Aries' relational motives with white males, but with people in general, Black, white, and others whom she encountered. And I use those terms generically in terms of what we think we understand now, although they don't mean that at all. In other words, when you get down to it, there are no white people on this planet or Black people. There are people in our observing minds that say, oh, they're dark in color or they're light in color. And so we get sloppy with our reasoning and our sense of critical thinking. So that's what I'm deconstructing here. The family records, which are in the Kansas University Spencer Library, show that 2 decades prior to her receiving her mother's 1856 letter, Harry engaged in serial polyandry. Now that's the philosophical term for many husbands, but it's serial. She didn't have them all at the same time. They were serially in time. That is, she managed a series of childbearing relationships in sequence with 5 quasi-husbands, at least 2 black male slaves, and 3 white plantation family connected males. And there may have been others long lost to the written and oral accounts. I could not have written this without having a strong oral and written tradition in my family system, because I could sit and talk to elder relatives. While I was in graduate school, I was in my 20s, and actually talk to the elder cousins, aunts and uncles who knew their grandparents and great-grandparents who had been in servitude. Now, I want to talk about the iron grip of victimization. All of Aries' intimate relationships were apparently consummated with men from different plantations in a limited area of Kentucky between Springfield and Harrisburg and Salvisa, where my grandfather was born. That said, I acknowledge that many academic scholars and others are wedded, however, to an at least subconscious belief in Black victimization, whether at the hands of white power holders or other external agencies. This is where I get deep in my writings, because it's a little hard. Sometimes people are too self-conscious who know but won't write about it. Such a belief in a Stockholm-like syndrome, I would assert, still holds captive the minds of most African-American slave descendants to this very day. I say this keenly aware that I am still loosening vestiges of my own victimizing beliefs again and again, as liberation and recovery are an ongoing, long-term process. I have learned from experience, my own and others, that victimization by an oppressor does not succeed without some level of consent and cooperation from the putative victim. This is not an easy notion to swallow, even for this author as a recovering victim. However, any argument or belief system that denies that at least some enslaved persons could have been freely willing agencies in their lives reveals the potential strength of the victimizing shadow within us. And I'm so glad I was around grandparents, the kind that I had.
Aww.
These were people who achieved their futures by
Yeah.
not letting things get in the way of their
Yeah.
present day, blocks in their thinking. But anyway, this really leads up to recognition of an inner power that confronts us with the often horrifying prospect of exercising our own self-agency and freedom of choice. If we look hard, that's what's going on in the evening news. Only it's not just African-American slaves. It's most of the American population, particularly those that live in some level of economic means that are not enough for them. So victimization is a persuasive condition to believe in because it's all around us. Without his admission to himself of such an awesome inner power, a chap named Nelson Mandela would not have survived 27 years of captivity under horrifying circumstances to become the father of his people and a universally revered icon to all of humanity. The same could be said of a famed Kentuckian named Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm.
He was born the same year I was. During his wrongful prosecution by the government and imprisonment while still a very young man for refusing to be drafted into the armed services on the grounds of his religion and pacifist beliefs. So everyone can think of others. Sojourner Truth is a tall, enslaved woman who could pick more cotton than most men could. And she mentioned that in her talks and anti-slavery talks. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin King Jr., Helen Keller, Shirley Chisholm, Oprah Winfrey, yourself, perhaps, and the list goes on. So that's really where I want to jump off into reminding us again about history, how human history, and I'll say now civilized history, really took off on the deserts of planet Earth. I would not have really been able to appreciate that until I moved here. And I had this beautiful pool to swim in, and I began to appreciate the climate, the condition of the desert, and the office of the complex I live in. It's at a higher kind of elevation in 29 Palms. But when I get out of the water, and I could look all around this valley called Yucca Valley, where the Marine base is in 29 Palms. And that's where I had a zinger of a hallucination. And it wasn't because I was on anything. It was something about where I was. It was sunset. It was 105 degrees and sunset. And the sun was so beautiful in a sunset. It only lasted about 7 minutes with blue turquoise sky around that. And I really just went into an altered state of consciousness. I couldn't understand where I was, except I was in a beautiful place of seeing these beautiful mountains all around. I went into where I realized the spiritual fathers of thousands of years ago, what they must have experienced out on the desert. They lived in tents, they lived in caves, and as they got in a quiet place in their deserts, deserts are really quiet. And that's what I was experiencing, was what makes us human beings. And
good question.
Little voices. How are we doing?
Good, we're good.
Okay.
We got 6 more minutes. We're good.
What we call in the Jewish synagogue or the Muslim church, the Christian church, it all is one word. It's the same word. It's the inner voice, the quiet, still, small voice that speaks to us. It occurs in all cultures of the earth. And as one gives oneself over to a higher created principle, which you can call whatever you want, but that's why I brought up DEI, because in Latin, DEI is pronounced Dei, which is either the genitive form that is the possessive form of Deus, which is God. Which I thought is remarkable. The politicians trying to get rid of DEI to uplift people that are the have-nots are really banishing God and haven't figured that out. It may be they're not educated enough, but whenever you take Latin, everyone who's taking Latin knows DEI means God. It was an unfortunate choice of marketing. I'll just put it like that. Whatever little thing they were trying to advocate for. So I was able to replicate maybe just within 3 months of living in 29 Palms, how civilization moved forward, where it was born on these deserts. And it was born through what later became called religion, which dealt with acknowledging a creator, a creative force. My father always referred to that as a mathematical force creating that thinks mathematically. So that was his embrace of God. It's very interesting. A lot of people in places like MIT or Caltech or University of Chicago think that way. And that's the way I've thought since I was a child. I was able to befriend this creator. I did use the word God because that's what my family used. It's what we used in our little Methodist church that we went to. And after my mother, very tragically for the family, passed away when I was 8 and she was 34, it was from what they call malignant hypertension, blood pressure, high blood pressure that the medical field did not know really how to treat it. There were no of the machines that we have now that you could sit with and get your blood cleansed. But I was a little frightened from that. I said, well, if she could die, it might not mean I could die too. So I asked God, I just frankly prayed about it, asked God, would you let me live, please? Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do that. What I got into was science. And I look back as a young adult, I said, gee, that was a childish thing to do. You haven't even proven the existence of God according to your classmates in college. And that's when I went through some real evolution on what are my religious viewpoints. And they expanded into a very universal. So that's what I'm attempting to take up on our podcasts.
Beautiful, which we are doing a great job of, I think. Thank you so much. And we are unfortunately out of time. We need to wrap up. So how do you want to end off for today?
I want to end by starting to embrace the future that we really want to embrace. If that's a future of health, embrace it now. Claim it. As my dermatologist reminded me some years ago in Atlanta, Georgia, I wanted a job somewhere badly, so just claim it. If that's what you want, claim it in your mental imagination. So that's where I want to end up. The future you want actually already exists. But where?
Yeah.
Your imagination, your heart, your soul. So use it. Make it active. What does that feel like? What does that future look like? How does it taste? What does it smell like? Who's in it? What do they look like? Where do I live? So I don't always have to have money to do what I want.
No.
I can have the things money can buy.
Beautiful. Sounds good. Thank you so much. And how can we contact you?
VENTWO@AOL.com, Vent2@AOL.com, and mention in the subject memoir.
All right.
Venerable GV memoir.
Will do.
My website is grantvenerablephd.com, all lowercase.
Thank you so much. All right. Enjoy your day, sweetheart. Thank you again.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, you know? I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.